Welcome Ape Army, time for another long overdue how-to video, this time on how to change the sport rear differential fluids on the B8 Audi RS5. If in doubt, always follow the factory service manual and Audi's recommended maintenance procedures as well as the recommended intervals. Cost for servicing the rear differential, assuming you have all the necessary tools, is under $100 US. It doesn't take too long and only involves 2 fill plugs and 2 drain plugs. It's about as hard as changing your oil. With that said, Audi does complicate things by specifying 2 different fluids for the rear differential. You have your typical 75 weight 90 gear oil on one side and ATF or transfer box oil on the other. If you're unfortunate enough to mix up which fluid goes where, kiss your differential and a few $1,000s goodbye. Fortunately, Audi did label the ATF side clearly, and I'm here to show you what goes where. Since I'm based in the US, I'll reference everything being off the driver's or left side of the vehicle. On the Audi RS5 Sport rear differential, the ATF or transfer box oil always goes on the left or driver's side of the vehicle when looking towards the front of the car. ATF left. Say it with me, ATF left. For the manual transmission fluid or MTF side, that's on the right or passenger side of the vehicle when looking towards the front of the car. MTF right. ATF left, MTF right. Burn it into your skull. In fact, Audi clearly stamps ATF on the left side of the rear differential. It's tough to get wrong, but people do. Don't be one of those people. Both drain plugs can be seen at the bottom, and more often than not, they're marked with a bit of blue paint. They also take a 5mm Allen head socket, which makes it quite obvious. The fill plugs are located on either the left or the right side of the differential and may be difficult to see depending on your brand of exhaust and how skinny your head is. Just like the drain plugs, the fill plugs are both 5mm Allen head sockets. In fact, all 4 plugs are identical and take the same small copper washer. You can reuse the copper washer or replace them if you feel the need. Now that I've hopefully put the fear of God into you, let's move on to supplies. As I mentioned before, the rear differential, much like the gearbox, takes 2 different types of fluids. Audi specifies part number G055515A2 for the ATF side of the transmission. This one little bottle of miracle fluid will run you about $45. There are no aftermarket substitutes, so you have to get it directly from Audi. On the gear side, we'll be using Motul Gear 300, which meets and exceeds Audi specifications and features a very high viscosity index. It's one of my favorite fluids. Beyond that, you'll need a jack or a lift, safety stands, and a few basic tools, including a torque wrench, which can read down to 15 Newton meters, which is also 11 foot-pounds for you Imperial people. A few different extensions, a ratcheting wrench, and a 5mm Allen head socket are also needed. In the description below the video, I have links to various products I use or that I recommend for this job, and most can be found on Amazon.com. For my methodology, you'll need a measuring container that measures at least 1 liter of fluid, as well as a fluid pump for filling each side of the differential. I have a 1 liter and a 5 liter, which I use for larger jobs like the transmission. I also recommend denatured alcohol or similar for cleaning your containers and pumps to prevent cross-fluid contamination. Looking at various fluid pumps, there are generally 2 routes you can go, cheap and not so cheap. The basic fluid pump will most likely screw into the top of the bottle and pump the fluid in. The problem with this is that the gear oil is thick enough to make it slightly difficult but not impossible if you do want to cheap out. In fact, I recommend getting just 2 of these so there's no risk of fluid cross-contamination. Just toss them afterwards. There are alternative options like the Motive Fluid Transfer System, which I also use to bleed brakes. While it doesn't save a ton of time on pumping 1 liter of fluid, it will save time when pumping 4 to 6 liters of fluid into the transmission. You'll get multiple uses out of it. I also saw this more expensive unit on Amazon, which utilizes an air compressor if you have one, and also comes with numerous adapters, some of which work on Audi vehicles. This would really help to speed things up. Another middle-of-the-road option was the 3L manual transmission fluid pump, which also came with a nice set of adapters. It's critical the adapters fit into the fill ports on the differential. The port is 3/8 of an inch or approximately 9.6 millimeters. Make sure they fit. With our gear and supplies sorted, start by changing the fluid on the ATF side. Remember, it's the driver's side of the differential, and if you look close enough, you'll see it marked with the ATF symbol on the side of the casing. Start by removing the fill plug first. This is critical. If you remove the drain plug and then can't remove the fill plug for some unknown reason, it's a flatbed to the dealership. If you are unable to remove the fill plug, you'll know to stop and seek professional help. Instead of having to hire a flatbed, you'll be able to drive your car to the shop. With that said, these small plugs are only tightened to 11 Newton meters, and they are generally not difficult to remove. Still, better safe than sorry. Pick your ratchet, appropriate extension, and swivel joint to get at the fill plug. Once it's removed, position your clean, empty measuring container and remove the drain plug, being careful to catch all of the fluid. As the draining fluid begins to slow, I do cheat and lower the car to get that last little bit out. Reinstall the drain plug and tighten to 15 Newton meters. For this service, I drained approximately 20 ounces. Compared to the new fluid, which has a nice golden color, the old looks like coffee. Cleaning out the measuring container, I refilled with fresh ATF or transfer case fluid as Audi calls it, adding a bit extra for any that will be left behind in the pump. Once the fluid is measured out, pour it into the fluid pumping container of your choice. As I mentioned earlier, it's important the hose or fitting on the fluid pump is small enough to insert into the fill port on the transmission. Test this out before going any further. Failure to do this could lead to quite a mess and you getting fluid all over the underside of your car. Using the motive, I give it a few pumps and off the new fluid goes into the differential. The transfer case oil is fairly low viscosity, so it flows quite easily. Access to the fill port will vary depending on the exhaust installed. I have JH Motorsport's excellent 2.75-inch exhaust system, and despite the larger piping, access was actually easier than when I had the AWE system. Get the fill port plug started by hand and then torque down to 15 Newton meters. Give everything a good wipe down with a bit of cleaner and you're good to go. If you're using one of the more complicated fluid pumps, make sure to clean it out with denatured alcohol. I go so far as to wipe out the inside so it is bone dry. On to the MTF side. Remember, MTF is always on the passenger side. Locate the drain and fill plug ahead of time. The drain plug is usually marked with a bit of blue paint. The fill port is more difficult to see as it resides up high and is partially blocked from view by a bulge in the rear differential. Once you locate it, remove the fill port plug first. Place your clean measuring container below the drain port and remove it next. Be careful to capture all of the drained fluid. Again, I lower the vehicle to get every last bit out. Since the gear oil is naturally of a higher viscosity, it'll take a lot longer to drain. With the old fluid drained, tighten the drain port plug to 15 Newton meters. Note the quantity of the drained fluid and dispose of it properly. Clean your container and fill it with fresh gear oil, adding just a bit of extra to compensate for any left behind in your pumping apparatus. This is usually a few milliliters at best. The process for pumping the new fluid in is the same as the ATF side, but it does take longer due to the fluid's increased viscosity. Once the fluid has been added, tighten the fill port plug to 15 Newton meters. Clean up any fluid which has dripped onto the differential or surrounding components. Because the Rostec VCDS cannot prime the sport differential pumps, lower the vehicle and slowly drive in a figure 8 alternating direction a few times. This will help to purge air from the system. That's it, you're done. As always, thanks for watching, and be sure to visit my new site, redmistracing.com. And feel free to leave constructive thoughts in the comment section and hit that like and subscribe button. Until next time, Ape Factory over and out.